This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Chof Aleph, and we're holding on to Chof Amid Beis. We're approximately 10 lines from the bottom. We're going to go up one little drop just to start off. Itmar Rav Kanam Rav Yechlan Ein Sarach Lalos Leischar, and Rav Avuam Rav Yechlan Sarach Lahalos Leischar. So this is going back in the Machlokes in a scenario of Zen Nehene V'zeh Loi Chaser. One guy is benefiting, the other one is not losing. What is the status? Do you have to pay for the benefit or not? And the Gemara just taught us that Rav Kahana Rav Yechanan said, Eino tzarech lahalos leischar, and Rav Vuam Rav Yechanan says, Sarech lahalos leischar. Comes along Rav Papa, Rav Papa to Rav Avua, this din of Rav Avua lav befeirish itmar, ella mechlala itmar. So we're coming to figure out the din of Rav Avua, the din of Sarech lahalos leischar, and says Rav Papa, this was not stated explicitly, but rather we could learn it implicitly. Titanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, not 11 Roshel Hektish, Arizeloi Ma'al. Someone takes a stone or a beam of Hektish. If the Gizbar takes this stone, takes this beam home, what's the halacha? Loi Ma'al. It's not considered that he's over a Me'ilah. It's not considered that he deconsecrated it. Why? So Rashi in the first line speaks out, because it was always in his Rishos, and therefore there's no change, therefore there's no Me'ilah. However, if he takes this beam or this stone, gives it to his friend, then what's the halacha? The halacha is Humal v'chaveroi loy ma'al. He's over a Me'ilah, but not his friend is not over in Me'ilah. The reason being because it's the transfer of this item done by the Gizbar is the act of Me'ilah, and therefore he is chayiv. The guy who received it, by just receiving it, didn't do anything. But now, what happens next? If a banai, if he builds this stone or this beam, l'toich beisai into his house, then harei loy ma'al. Then he's still not over in Me'ilah until ad sheyidar tachteha shavapruta. The act of building it into his house is not a din of Me'ilah till he actually lives underneath it. Ve'amar Shmuel, and said Shmuel, v'sheniach al pi aruba, it has to be a case where he placed it over an opening in the roof. Placed it over an opening of a roof, but he didn't actually connect it to the building. As Rashi says, v'loy kavav binyan. Why? Because if he was kaveya, that would be called a shinoi. That would be called changing the item. And therefore, there's no me'ilah until he actually is a dar, till he actually lives underneath this beam, underneath this stone. That's the case. Says the Gemara of Yasser Avua coming to Rav Yechanan. Rav Avua was sitting in front of Rav Yechanan, becoming Shmei Shmuel, and he was saying over the name of Shmuel, what do we see from this case? Hadar b'chata chaveira shleimi daitoi sarich lahalois loischar. We see for this case that if you dar b'chata chaveira shleimi daitoi, you had to pay. Where do we see this in this case? So let's look at the last Rashi. Rashi speaks out. Zoisei meres midiktani, from the fact that it says the chi dar tachteo chayiv, that when you live underneath the beam, you're obligated. Va'af al gav, these are the critical words. Sheloi midags hektish avad. Hektish, the entity of hektish, doesn't know what you're doing, so therefore it's sheloi midaitai, and therefore for hektish it's considered loy chasar. Zen nehene, the guy sleeping, the guy sitting, the guy benefiting underneath this beam. V'zel loy chasar, and the gizbar, and the Me'ilah and the Beis Hamikdash not losing. Zen nehene v'zel loy chasar. What do we see in this case? Sarech lahalos l'schar. So says the Gemara, this is the Raya. This is where Rav Avua said his din. So his din was said over the name Yosef Rav Avua and Vishasak. And when this din was said over, Vishasak lay, Rav Yechon didn't say anything. So Ihu Savar. So Rav Avua thought, Mideshasak Moidile, seems Rav Yechanan is maskim that you have to pay. But says the Gemara, it's not true. So that was the klala that we're learning out this din of. They're learning out this din of Amar Rav Avua, Amar Rav Yechanan. Says the Gemara, V'lohi, this wasn't accurate. V'lohi Ashkechol, V'lohi Ashkech. Rav Yechanan wasn't listening to him at all. Why was Rav Yochanan not listening to him at all? Says the Gemara, Kedir Rabba, like the din of Rabba, the Amar Rabba on the last line, Hektish Shaloi Midas. A case of Hektish without Das is equivalent to, as we turn over to Chaval Vamid Aleph, Kehedyoit Midas Dami. Says Rabba, the entire comparison is off. Because in any case of a Hektish not having Das, that is essentially a case of a Hedyot having Das, and therefore it's not considered a Darvid Chatzchavera, Shaloi, Midaita, no raya to the Shita of Rav Avua, to the Shita of Rav Yechanan. Continues the Gemara, Shalach le Rav Abba, top line, Chav Aleph Amid Aleph, Shalach le Rav Abba bar Zavda Lamari bar Mar. So they said, ask this question from Rav Huna. When you see Rav Huna asking this question, as they were going to Rav Huna was nifter, you couldn't ask him. Rav Huna. So Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, told over, this is what his father Rav Huna held. Mishmei de Rav, the name of Rav, that what? You do not have to pay. That was how they said over the din of Rav Huna. And you rent the house from Reuven, you got to pay to Shimon. It says Shimon? I don't understand. I read from Reuven, I paid to Shimon. What sheikh is Shimon? Says no, hachi kamar. Nimsa habayis shel Shimon. If you rent the house from Reuven and it comes out that Shimon is really the owner, then maloschar, you got to pay Shimon the rent. So two dinim they said over the name of Rav Huna. Number one, you do not have to pay. Number two, you rent from Reuven, you find out it's Shimon's, you just have to pay to Shimon. Says the Gemara, these two statements contradict each other. Tarti, both of these, meaning either way, do you yes have to pay someone or not have to pay someone? Clearly, Shimon doesn't know that you're in his house. So why are you paying Shimon if you hold Zanan of Zeloi Chaser you don't pay for? Explains the Gemara 10 lines down. There are different cases. One is where the house is ready, waiting to be rented out, and therefore Shimon is losing. In the case of Shimon losing, then the halacha is inachanami. You have to pay Shimon. In the other case, it was loy kaim la'agra. Therefore, you do not have to pay Shimon. Proves the Gemara to this point, about 10 lines down. First word of line is itmar nami. Says the Gemara, we find the same thing. Itmar nami, Amar Rav Achia baravin, Amar Rav, Amil Amar Rav Achia baravin, Amar Rav Huna, Hadar b'chatz chaver shlemidaitai, Einay tzarich lalos l'schar. If you rent a house in the city, you pay the bailim. What do you mean? You rent it from the city, you pay the bailim. Says the Gemara, the bailim, what are they doing over here? Answers the Gemara, hachi kamar nim soloi bailim. If it comes out that you rented a house from the city, and it's not really the city's, it's a private owner's, ma'alim lo yischar, you got to pay them. Says the Gemara, tarti, those two statements are size to each other. Answers the Gemara, hadekaim l'agra, hadloikaim l'agra, just like we said over the name of Rav Huna. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Zchaira, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Hadar b'chatz chaveiroi shaloi midaitoi, ein sarich l'halos lo yischar. You do not have to pay lamaisa for living in your friend's house without him knowing about it. Why? Mishum shenemar, and this proves the point that we just said in the case where it's a loy kaim aleigra, you don't have to pay him. Mishum shenemar, v'siya yukas sha'ar, and through desolation the gate is broken open. And Rashi explains what this means is that a desolate house is visited by shadim, and therefore, if no one is in the house at all, the house will get destroyed. And Omar Bar Vashi, Ledidi Chazili, I actually saw this, Umankach Kitura, and it looked like there was a battering roll knocking through the front door. So the Gemara proves that the reason that you don't pay if it wasn't going to be rented out, it's because you're really doing the owner a favor. And similarly, a second reason, Rav Yosef Amar, Beisa Miyatva Yosef. Says Rav Yosef, a house that one lives in remains in good condition. Explains Rashi, what's the reason? Because we all know you live in a house and you notice. You need a new light bulb, you need a new faucet, you notice all the things that are necessary in the house, so it maintains the house by living in the house. Says the Gemara, what is the difference between these two terutzim? In the case where the owner was using the house as storage, so there's no issue of the shadim because he actually goes there, but still not properly living there. So you would benefit for someone properly living there. And we continue. Hahu Gavra. We continue with some stories on the same theme of Zenehene. V'zeh lo yichaser. Hahu Gavra debana apanya kilkilta diyasmi. There was someone who built a house on the property which was a destruction site of Yisaimim. And Agbe Rav Nachman apanya minei. Rav Nachman collected the actual mansion from him to pay the Yisaimim. Says the Gemara, what? Lemer Kasav Rav Nachman. Does Rav Nachman really hold that you have to pay? And that's why over here he paid it to the Yisaimim. Says the Gemara, no. Over there, before this guy came and built the mansion, you know what's going on? It was inhabited by Carmenians. And the Avali Yasmi Davramud and actually paid the Yisaimim some rent every month. So now that this guy went and put up his mansion, the Yisaimim, at some level, is losing. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman told the guy who built the mansion, Zilpaisin, he asked me, you have to go pay them, and he didn't listen, and therefore, Agbi Rav Nachman Lapani Minei, that's why Rav Nachman went and collected the mansion from him because the Yisaimim were losing. So it's not a case of Zenehen of Zeloi Chaser, but rather the Yisaimim are losing, and that's why they have to pay. We continue with the next part of the Mishnah, Keitza Mishalemes Mashahenes. The Mishnah continued with different cases of an animal damaging. If it was in the middle of the street, you pay for the benefit. If it was on the side of the street, then you pay what it damaged. So the Gemara wants to figure out what exactly is this case of the animal damaging of the sides of the street, that therefore you'd have to pay ma she hezek. So says the Gemara, we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rav uben machzeres, Shmuel Amar afilu machzeres nami potter. Rav says the case is machzeres, where the animal turns to get the food on the side of the street. Shmuel says no, even in that scenario, the animal would be potter. So according to Shmuel, what is the case of the Mishnah? That you're obligated for paying for the animal eating on the sides, the machayev, and the animal goes, and goes and stands on the sides of the road. So Rashi over here explains what's going on in Rav. Let's look at Rashi for a moment. Amar Rav Machzeres. Roisha me'rechava litzida, turned its head to the side of the road. Shel rechava. V'achla peirais katani mas nisan. And in that case, the mishalma mashezik aval gav dekula ikaimai berechava. Even though the animal is standing in the street, still you have to pay in this scenario for the hezek that the animal did, because lamaisa you destroyed your friend's produce. Shmuel says, but in this case, since the animal is in the middle of the street, therefore it's a case of Shane versus Arabim, and Shane versus Arabim is Potter. So that's machlokes Rav and Shmuel. How do we learn the din in the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Before we go any further, we have a second lashon. V'ikun demasi l'shmaitza babei nafshe. There are those that learn the shmaitza by itself. Machzeres, Rav Amar Chayeves, Shmuel Amar V'tura. Well, Shmuel, and according to Shmuel, that it's potter. Mishlam is mashe zika yicham mishkach. So it's case Mishnah. Demachayva. Kon shav gilu rechava v'azlo v'kama b'tzidei rechava. So that's the machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Masiv. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Continues the Gemara. Akasha on Rav Masiv Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Mafteya mi Pesach Achanos. The Mishnah said that if the animal eats from the door of the store, what's the halacha? Mishalemes mashanenis. You have to pay for the damages. Heichi mishkachas, says the Gemara. Pshita de machzeres. Seems that the animal turns its head and eats from inside the store. And yet, what do we see in the Mishnah? You have to pay, in such a case, mashanenis. V'kamar mashanenis. And in this case, says you pay for you benefit mashanenis in masha zekoiloi. And again, to remind yourself, what's the difference between mashanenis and masha zika? Mashanenis is just the benefit that the owner got that his animal is now fed. But it's not paying for the full hezek. Whereas masha zika, you have to pay for whatever you damaged. Explains the Gemara, who meisav lav, who mefarik la kaima bekeren zavis. That the case of the store is discussing is like if you look directly across in Rashi, that the store was on the corner. So as the animal was walking straight in the street, that's the case that it ate from the store. So it's not a case comparable to what we just said, that the animal turned its head and damaged, but rather the case is that it ate in the course of walking, and that is the reason why we said that you pay masha nehenis, because it's a lower form of damage as the animal just ate in its course of walking. Ikadi Amri, says the Gemara, we have a second lashon in this machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Ikadi Amri, says the Gemara, 8 lines to the bottom. First line is machzeres. Machzeres, kuli amalei pligi de chayav, kis machzeres, everyone holds its chayiv. Ki pligi, what's the machlokes? Ben maksa, makam, shusai, there's shosar habim. The case is, one puts part of his rishos from his own field, he gives over a little piece of his own field to Rishos HaRabim. V'hachi itmar, and this is the machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rav lo shanel machzeres, when are you liable to pay for damages? If you turn your head. If someone left over, gives over a piece of his field to Rishos HaRabim and leaves his stuff there, then says Rav, Ptura, if the animal walking by goes and eats that, it's more in the course of his walking, the animal is part of the owner. Shmuel Amar, Filu Maksa Makam Shusai, Rabim Chayaves. Says Shmuel, no, I don't care that he used to be part of his Rishos. Now it's Rabim. He is Chayiv. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Lema bebar b'shusai kamifki. Why don't we say that this is a case of bar, of a pit that is considered in his own rishos and is one liable for that? The kamifligi. Rav Damar Potter. Rav says that if you eat the produce from this guy's field, he would hold that him putting down his pit, he'd be Potter. Kasavar bar b'shusai chayiv. A bar in your rishos, you are liable for. And just like you're going to be liable for your bar, therefore, if someone else, meaning you have no right to put it there. So if someone else eats your stuff, they're going to be potter. Shmuel Amar Chayiv to have a barber shusay potter. Do you have a right to put it there? Therefore, if someone else eats your stuff, they're going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, nice attempt, but Amnach Rav, these are machlekes Rav and Shmuel, is not related to the case of barber shusay or not. Says Rav, really, I'll tell you, as we turn over to Chaval from Beis, says Rav, really, I'll tell you about Alma. In general, barber shusay potter. In general, I'll tell you, a bar in his rishos is potter. B'shayni hacha. Why is the case different? Amar lav kol kaminach lemakris le parasecha l'rishos harabim umachayvis lehu leturai. It's not within your Rishos, that you should put your fruit near the public and make me chayiv. So nothing to do with bar. Really, bar, you're going to be potter. So then you should be chayiv for the produce. No, there's a different svar over here. The guy can say, what's your fruit doing right at the edge of the street? Do you want my animal not to eat it? That's crazy. Shmuel Amar on the flip side. 3 lines down, Chaval from the base. Shmuel Amar Baal Bar Rishus, you really are chayiv. Tibish Lama Bar. When it comes to bar, Yikla Meimar, Lavai Daite. When it comes to bar, says Shmuel, you could say that the animal does not know that there's a bar there, and therefore that's the reason why the owner of the pit is chayiv. Ela peiros mikla meimar lavadaitei, says the Gemara. When it comes to peiros, can you say that? How can you say that? You put your braiders there. Hachazilu, the other animal sees it. So both Rav and Shmuel come along and explain that their machlaikas is not going to be the same machlaikas as whether one would be obligated for a bar, bear shusai, but rather each could hold the bar b'shusa would be chayav or pater, irregardless to this machlaikas. Continues the Gemara, lema machzeres tanohi. Suggest the Gemara this machlaikas Rav and Shmuel. Let's suggest that this is really a machlaikas tanoim. Titania, we learned in a brayso, 7 lines down, Chavav and Beis. Achlu mitachar chava, mishalem is mashenenis, mitzider chava, mishalem is mashezika, devira meir, just like our Mishnah. Rav Yehuda, Rav Yosef, Rav Elazar, Aimrim, ein dar kolech elo lehalech. An animal's derech is not to eat, but to walk. So, one second, what did Rav Yosef just add on? Rav Yosef, Hainu Tanakama. That would explain that while walking, you are chayav mashenenis, what's in front of you. So what's Rav Yosef's differing from the Tanakama? Ella, we have to say, machzeres ikabeinayu. This machlekes Rav and Shmuel is going to be machlekes of what's going on in this brayso. Tanakama, so machzeres tam mishalem mashenenis. Machzeres pays for the benefit, not for the damage. So just the Gemara, that is the fine nuance of Chilik Tin Rav Yosef Tanakama, and it says the Gemara, loy, that's not the machlekes. The Koli Alma Machzeres, Ikirav Ikishmo. They could hold either one. But what's going on over here in this machlekes Tanakama and Rav Yosef? Be'bier b'steyacher kamiflagi. They're arguing about bier b'steyacher. Says the Gemara, Amar Savar, the Tanakam holds a beer b'stei acher. V'loiber shesram there for your potter. You only have to pay mashenenis. Amar Savar beer b'stei acher. V'loi bershos ha nizek. Question is which one is going to be excluded. Says the Gemara, bershos hamazik. V'loi bershos hamazik. Bershos hamazik. Lema baruch bershusei my bayi. Why don't you just say what's your animal doing my rishos? Ela de'elfa v'Rav Aishia ika beinayu. Rather, says the Gemara, to machlekes over here in this brayso of Tanakam and Rav Yosef is not going to be a machlekes of machzeres if the animal turns its head, but rather it's going to be a machlekes of Rav Ilfa and Rav Aishia, which we learned yesterday on Daf Chof. And we continue with the Mishnah halfway down, Chof Aleph Amid Beis. Ha-kelev v'ha-gidi shekavtza merois shagag. We have a dog, we have a gidi, a goat, a kid that jumps off a roof, and v'shavras ha-kelim, and it lands on kelim and breaks them. Says the Mishnah B'Shalin Nezik Shalim, Mibnei shehein mu'adin, you have to pay full damages, because these animals, a dog, a kid, a kelev, a gidi, are considered mu'ad, normal, to jump off a roof, and therefore it's a subcategory of regel, and therefore you have to pay full damages. We had this case, the dog takes a biscuit from a bunch of coals and goes over to a standing group of grain. Dog ate the biscuit, and on the bottom of the biscuit is a coal. And it lights up the dogish. Says the Gemara, what's going on in the first case of the Mishnah of the Kelev and the Gedi? Seemingly, the reason why the Kelev and the Gedi are obligated because they jumped. Hanavle Potter. the implication would be. But if they fell off the roof, then what would be? The owner would be potter. Alma kasavar, and this opens up a massive sugya. Tchilasai b'pshia v'saifai ba'oines potter. The owner was negligent to allow his animals to stay on the roof because they're liable to jump, but they didn't jump. They fell off at the end of the day. Says the Gemara, if the animal was liable to jump, that's the beginning of his negligence. And then it ends off as an unavoidable mishap. What's the halacha in such a case? Potter, the diak from the Mishnah is that you are potter from paying. Says the Gemara, Tanam Mihachev writes this. And the Bryce is explicitly naflai piturim. Says the Gemara, but now let's understand what's going on with chasa b'pshia v'saifai be'oinis. Oh, nich lemandamar. This works according to the mandamar that says tchilas b'pshia v'saifai be'oinis potter. Everything is good. Elamandamar, according to the bin that says tchilas b'pshia v'saifai be'oinis is chayiv. Michael and Meimar, what are you going to say? Why are you going to be chay? Why in this case would you be potter? If normally tchilas b'pshia v'saifai be'oinis is chayiv, says the Gemara, because this case is going to be different. The reason it's going to be different over here, and it's not going to be a case of tchilasa b'pshia v'seifa ba'ines, is the reason why you're going to be potter is because the kalim were left right next to the wall. And since the kalim were left right next to the wall, it's not the owner of the gedi, of the kelev's fault, because the kalim were left in a very vulnerable position. That if the animal would have jumped off, which is what the animal is normally prone to do, it would not have actually hit the kalim. And therefore, it's not even considered tchilas b'pshia in such a case. And that's the reason why if it eventually falls onto the kalim, the owner is going to be potter cause he did nothing, no pshia at all. Amar Rav Zvin Mishmei de Rava. With this, we're going to wrap up today's shir. Says Rav Zvin Mishmei de Rava. There are even times the animal falls off, that owner will be obligated. Why? If we have a wall that is a shaky wall, therefore, even with regard to falling, it's considered pshia to let your animal go on top of a shaky wall. Maini, who explains tomorrow, what's the case? The owner should have realized the nafal archei. The owner should have realized that the animal, excuse me, is it the case that the owner should have known that it's going to fall? What do you mean? The wall did not fall. And the animal fell. So what was the problem? Continues the Gemara, just like we thought originally. Says the Gemara, it's a narrow wall. Because it's a narrow wall, therefore the owner should have realized that the animal could fall off. It's all of Shia, and that's why in this case the owner of the animal would be Chayiv. We'll pick it up from Tanur Rabban and continuing discussing the Kelev, the Gedi jumping off the wall in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.